Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Carlos Alcaraz is 2024 Wimbledon champion with a straight set win over Novak Djokovic. Alcaraz's fourth career major title. He becomes the youngest to win the Channel Double at 21 years old. The first non-Big Three member to win multiple majors in a season since 1999, Andre Agassi. He's going to have a bunch of chances in January, and this was already established, to become the youngest to win a career Grand Slam in Australia. But Wimbledon becomes the first major of the four that he has now won twice. It is another surprisingly straightforward Djokovic major final. And I know the word another there might be surprising for you to hear, but recently there have been multiple occasions where we've gone into a slam final with Djokovic involved, and we've been gearing up for an epic battle. And there have been, opinions kind of on both sides, odds pretty close together. And now it's a few times pretty recently and pretty consistently where sometimes this happens with Djokovic. So one that you can go way back for is the 2013 Wimbledon final when Murray beat Djokovic in straights. So that was kind of previous era to me. But since the 2019 Australian Open win versus Nadal, if you remember, that was a path where Nadal just dominated everybody on his way to the final, and then Djokovic dominated him. Then you have the next year, the Roland Garros final against Nadal. That time it was Rafa taking Novak to the woodshed. Australian Open 2021, Djokovic blows out Medvedev, and the thought was that Daniil was going to be able to put up a really good fight in that final. US Open 2021, we get another Djokovic-Medvedev situation. It goes the other way in straight sets. Medvedev wins to rob Djokovic the chance of the calendar Grand Slam. And now this is the latest here at Wimbledon, where Alcaraz wins the opening two sets 6-2, 6-2, and the final set, the third set, in a tiebreak, 7-4. Here's what we'll be going over. We're going to spend a good amount of time on the first game of the match, which set the tone and also established some of the themes that we continued to see as the match progressed. We'll talk about the overall match dynamics. We'll discuss the qualities that Alcaraz really shined, the areas of the game that of his game that I think deserves some extra love and attention. And then at the end, we'll unpack what we learned about Djokovic from this performance. And some of you who may be listening to this analysis may get frustrated that I'm not going to bring up Novak's knee. I'm not going to talk about the surgery until the very, very end. For now, to start, that has nothing to do with this. Let's analyze the match that we saw in front of us here first, and then we'll zoom out on Novak and talk about, I guess, what this means for him. I think what it means for Alcaraz is rather obvious. He's just in an extraordinary position, and to do it again, to do it twice, and it doesn't matter if maybe Djokovic of last year was better than Djokovic, the Djokovic that we saw on this particular Sunday. Still, to beat Djokovic back-to-back Wimbledon finals is unbelievable. Let's get into it. First game. Djokovic's volleying issues in this opening game were tone setting, because the premise of the match tactically, Novak knew this. I said it in the preview. Djokovic needs to try to be dominant offensively with his serve and then immediately behind his serve. There wasn't really going to be a place, given what Alcaraz brings to the table, given what we'd seen from Djokovic, there wasn't going to be a place for Novak to do a whole lot of defending and still have success in this match. He had to really get on top of things and dictate and dominate. And he tried to do that immediately by coming forward often. We saw serve and volleys. We saw very quick approach shots off of anything short. And in the first game, you had Djokovic butchering 3 to 4 volleys, 3 somewhat routine ones. And I think the common theme on this one, if you look at all of the volleys, I think the common theme was that they were going deep in the court. And I'm a huge believer in singles that you pretty much, unless you have a sitter that you have plenty of time to take a fuller swing at and it's high above the level of the net, and you're really able to just kind of knock it away with a lot of speed into a corner, sometimes that comes up. But I think on, 80% of manageable volleys, assuming you're looking to finish the volley, it has to go short in the court, preferably short angle. And you saw Djokovic continuing in this first game to just volley deep in the court, which gives Alcaraz, who's positioned at the baseline here. And that is really, it's not a complicated philosophy when it comes to volleying short. When you have a fast player at the baseline, you have to make them travel the maximum distance. And the maximum distance is always going to be short in the court where there's space. Because when they're on the baseline, they're just not having to move as much. You're volleying deep to where they already are, deep. And you're letting them take a full-blooded cut at a passing shot where when you execute a drop volley, at least you normally make them, if you hit it well, you make them go to the continental grip and you put them in a position where they're hitting the ball from a low contact point close to the net and they can't get much on the ball. But if you look at like one of the routine volleys on the forehand that Djokovic had at deuce in this game, one of the many deuces, this was actually deuce number 1. Many deuces would follow. But Djokovic had a forehand volley. He went deep cross court, and Alcaraz, with his quick hands and his big forehand, moved to his right and laced a forehand down the line pass. Now, I do think a lot of the issues on the volley execution here from Novak was down to nerves. Alcaraz broke in this game, by the way. I think most of you know that. It was a pretty memorable game, but I'll say it just to cover my bases. Djokovic did seem nervous in this game. There were ground stroke mistakes. By the way, Alcaraz seemed kind of nervous in this opening return game as well. He made some uncharacteristic mistakes. The margin of misses from him at times were like, wow, you missed that by 8 feet. That's not normal. But I still think it's significant what Novak looked like when he was nervous in this particular case, especially because over the years, I have become accustomed to seeing Djokovic look very, very different when nervous. I have argued for a long time now that when Novak feels nerves and he feels tension, the reason he's able to work through them and still win is partially because he's able to lean on his legs. One of the famous examples of this was the Wimbledon final against Berrettini in 2021, where I do think the pressure of the calendar Grand Slam started to set in at that point. And he didn't really have the ability to be very aggressive off the ground because the confidence and the conviction wasn't there because of the nerves. He's still able to win these matches, even in a Wimbledon final against a great grass court player, because he's not going to miss a lot. He's still going to move great. He's still going to defend great. He's still going to put returns in play. And there's this mode of Djokovic where, okay, I can't be all that aggressive because there's too much tension in my body, but I can still play well. That he can't do anymore. So let's loop back to the premise. The premise is Djokovic needs to try to be dominant offensively with his serve and immediately behind his serve in order to have a chance to win the match. In fact, I said that Novak, in order to break serve, needed to land aggressive returns. So the whole premise of this match was that Novak needed to take control with his offense. That is a different premise than what Djokovic won for most of his career with. And it's remarkable, it was remarkable, just to watch him go through this draw and see him go as far as the final with just this absolutely menacing and dominant offensive display. That was amazing to see. And that speaks to the adaptation in Djokovic's game. But here in this final, as I watched this opening game, I thought, Novak has nerves. That's nothing new. But the problem that is creating, that is new. Because usually the solution is he can play safer and still get away with it. My early thought was Djokovic looked a little bit insecure about his movement against Alcaraz's offense, meaning he wasn't willing to play neutral early on. He was ultra aggressive, hard down the line right away, tons of forced approach shots, plenty of serve and volley. He did not want to move. That's the difference. And that persisted for the rest of the match. There weren't any long rallies. Alcaraz went up a double break in the first set, and it felt like they hadn't even played a rally. Now ask yourself, would that ever be the case? Sorry to be a little bit Djokovic focused here. Would that ever be the case for Novak in, I don't need to say his athletic prime. I don't need to say 2014 or 15 or 11. I can say, would that ever be the case for Novak in 2022? I would argue no. There is no way he would go down a double break having not even ventured or tested the water with a long rally. Longest rally of the match, by the way, was 13 shots. So going forward and talking more about the general dynamics in the match, there was a continuation of the first game in the sense that Djokovic continued to come forward a lot, and the numbers ended up being really bad for Djokovic at the net. 27 for 53, that is 51%. Djokovic got passed for clean winners 10 times. Alcaraz is so quick, he's such a shot maker. If you aren't precise, he passes you. And if you try to be too precise, then you miss. And we saw both. We saw Novak try to make the adjustment on the deep volleys initially that ended up burning him. And he went to the drop volley, and he hit the top of the tape on a few. And this isn't just true for volleys. You can see it on approach shots. You definitely have an intimidation factor that is ever present with Alcaraz's speed. But if you are a little bit more patient and you're able to wait for your opportunities and apply pressure, being more comfortable with your ability to play from neutral as well, then maybe you don't feel quite as desperate to do such severe damage. Just a theory. The other thing that Alcaraz was doing was the chip returns to extinguish the Djokovic early firepower. So that first of all, the returns in play numbers were very, very high for Carlos. I saw the stat midway through the second set was a little under 25% was what Djokovic was getting first serves unreturned. But he came into the final at 40%. So one thing Alcaraz was definitely going to do was give his legs a chance. So I'm going to block returns. I'm going to make a ton of returns. And Novak couldn't really finish with his +1 forehands. Given no pace to work with and very little positional advantage because Alcaraz has more time to recover. Plus, he's just crazy fast. So you put all of these things into play, and we know what about Djokovic's forehand. It's tremendous. He can ramp up the speeds, especially when the ball comes in a little bit harder. But if you give him a nothing chipped ball, a very low-paced chipped ball up the middle, is he going to be able to produce the kind of violent damage that Alcaraz can from the same position? No, not quite. So when Alcaraz was chipping his returns deep middle, not a lot of pace, recovering to the middle, getting ready for that +1 forehand, Novak wasn't able to do enough. He didn't have enough pop, not enough generation off of that particular forehand to do +1 damage in a meaningful way with enough consistency. So again, back to the premise. Djokovic needs to do severe damage immediately with his serve and right behind his serve and even sometimes his return. If he's not finishing at the net, if his serve is coming back, if his +1 is getting neutralized, you just don't have that playing out. But it gets worse for Novak. It gets better for Alcaraz because thus far we've only talked about how Djokovic's offense wasn't converting efficiently. Alcaraz's attack felt automatic. Very simply, you had a mismatch here. You had a mismatch between Alcaraz's weaponry that we know comes in a lot of different forms. You have power off of both wings. You have the generation of angles. you have net play, you have drop shots, all that weaponry against Djokovic's movement. That was a mismatch in this match. And you knew it was a mismatch because every time Alcaraz had a chance to attack, it seemed like game over. It was lights out. We're not used to seeing that, obviously, with Novak. You look at forehand ground stroke winners, 14-6 Alcaraz. And I took passing shots out of that number. It actually would have looked better for Alcaraz if I included passing shots. But if you just look at forehand winners off the ground, no passing shots, 14-6 Alcaraz. He has an easier time getting the ball by Djokovic and doing that damage. But I also think that winners don't tell the full story because even when Novak was able to get the racket on the ball, it was easier for Alcaraz to put him off balance. It was easier for Alcaraz to disrupt his contact point. Even the racket on ball defense from Novak was flimsier and weaker. And that has to do not with anything Djokovic is doing with his racket, but it's all legs. It's all how quickly he gets into that corner, how quickly he explodes out of that corner, how balanced he's able to be when he gets there. All of these things are what is determining how much Novak can get on the ball when he's defending in his corners. And it felt like more having a slice. It felt like more, okay, he made the one get, but he really couldn't recover back into the court, and Alcaraz finished the next ball. So winners on its own don't really do it justice. And just to compare, because while we're talking about Alcaraz's offense, we already talked about Novak's offense and only converting 51% at the net. Alcaraz converted 73% at the net. And in terms of movement, Novak struggled in particular moving out to his forehand, which Alcaraz snuffed out very early on and hammered. And this is where I would have liked to do a little bit of film study, but I actually can't for Wimbledon for copyright reasons and because of certain technology that has made it impossible for me to even take screenshots. But love all second set, which was another moment where you were thinking, okay, bad first set Djokovic. He did have a good hold at the end of the first set. Let's see how it goes here at the start of the second. Alcaraz forced 3 errors into Djokovic's forehand, all defendable. None of them were desperate emergency situations on Novak's forehand. They were all balls that he could have put back in the court and didn't. So Novak's movement compared to Alcaraz's movement, stark difference there. And at this point, you have to ask the question, why wasn't it obvious when Djokovic played all the other opponents leading up to this? Why wasn't it obvious that his movement wasn't good enough? And that comes down to opponents. That comes down to a different speed that elite tennis is played at, elite level tennis. It is all faster. It is all harder. You run more. The ball's coming quicker. Your opponent's moving quicker. Everything is happening at a higher speed. And Novak just wasn't getting attacked all that much throughout this tournament. Popyrin is what I would call an aggressive offensive player. But other than that, I don't think there is anyone who is really attacking him with the kind of fervor in terms of taking time away, in terms of achieving high ground stroke speeds, in terms of moving the ball around the court relentlessly. There's nobody similar to Alcaraz that Novak had to face. And, certainly that's not Musetti, and it was not Rune, the way Rune was playing especially, and it probably wouldn't have been de Minaur. I'm not saying de Minaur wouldn't have maybe won the match. We don't know. But I'm saying in terms of attacking Djokovic at a level where he looks slow moving around the court, there is no one who could do that until Alcaraz, where it became obvious, okay, there's actually a large defensive issue here. Now, I did see hints of it. There were moments where I did think, is he moving explosively enough? But it was hard to tell because he didn't have that measuring stick opponent, which goes back to something I said in the preview. This was his first match against a top 5 player since January against Sinner. It was his first match against a top 10 player since Monte Carlo against Ruud. Novak lost both of those matches. And by the way, that's the only reason why I can kind of give myself a pass for missing this so badly. Although I think I should have seen it, and I think it was a bad job by me not seeing it, that Djokovic wasn't really moving quick enough to have a chance at beating Alcaraz. Now, I knew that the defense wasn't going to be there enough, but I thought maybe the offensive tennis would make up for it. I will say this, even if the offensive tennis was perfect by Djokovic, I don't think it would have been viable. Seeing, I guess, how penetrable he was defensively. I mean, in summary, it didn't really matter who was attacking. Alcaraz had favorable dynamics either way, and when that's the case, the match is only going one way. Guys, I just want to take a quick break in the analysis to remind you about my newsletter, The Draw, which comes out every Tuesday morning. It's a curation of the best tennis content that I find across the internet into your mailbox every single week. The open rates are amazing. The cancellation rates are incredibly low. I'm so pleased to see that people are enjoying the newsletter. And if you want to find out what all the fuss is about with The Draw, you can subscribe with the link in the description, or you can go to thedraw.tennis. That's thedraw.tennis. Also, a reminder that I've started a Discord community which has proliferated over the course of Wimbledon, which has been really rewarding, and I've been really happy to see that. Of course, I will have a mailbag coming up later this week, and if you want to if you want to ask questions in the mailbag, you can go to the YouTube community tab where I will be posting soon, but you can also go to the Discord, which has a 24/7 mailbag question tab where you can get your questions in if you find yourself missing the YouTube community tab post often. The link for the Discord is also in the description. All right, back to the analysis. Other things Alcaraz did well. This was a terrific serving performance, and this also fogged up the path to victory for Djokovic. I think we all kind of were in agreement that in order for Djokovic to win, he would need to outserve Alcaraz, unlike last year. And Novak probably did serve better than he did last year, but Alcaraz and the way he was serving was also a tone setter, was also a statement that suggested, all right, Novak might serve well, but there's no way that the difference in serving is going to be the difference in the match. Not with Carlos serving at the level that he did. He was up 5 miles per hour from his average serve speed early on in the match, first few service games, started 7 for 7 on first serve points won. So along with that love-all break of serve to start the match where Djokovic missed some finishes, the service games by Alcaraz were also quite commanding, and that also contributed to the tone setting. Djokovic said after the match, quote, "I've never seen him serve that way. I've never seen him serve that fast." Now, his average came down from 127. It landed at 122, which is really good. Alcaraz ended up at 59% first serves in, which isn't astronomical, but to me, that's perfect, especially once Alcaraz realizes that he's much better than his opponent from neutral. Why not go huge on the first serve? Why not try to be deadly on that first serve? You know you have a chance to just win the point behind your second because you're winning the rallies. So that's what Alcaraz did. He went really big on the first serve. He got the reward because he won 84% of his first serve points. And that is the money stat for Alcaraz. That's where he's really getting the purchase. Where was he going? Ton of body serves on the deuce side. And that really stifled Djokovic's ability to be aggressive on the return. On the deuce side, he went mostly into Novak's forehand, up the tee into Novak's forehand. The reason I like that is because it makes it very hard for Djokovic to make Alcaraz hit a first ball backhand. If Alcaraz goes out wide on the ad side, Djokovic is going to try to hit a backhand return cross court. He's going to try to get it into that Alcaraz backhand, and Novak is excellent at hitting that cross court return where you're getting to hit the ball back where it came from, so it's easier to time, and you have the lower part of the net, and you have more distance to the baseline. You have that safe cross-court return into the weaker wing of Alcaraz, at least the less dangerous wing. Instead, Carlos says, nope, I'm going to bring a lot of pace over the lowest part of the net, make you hit forehand returns, and I'll get to start with my forehand more often. I really do think that the best spot to serve Djokovic on the ad side is generally to his forehand because of this reason. Alcaraz also pummeling the second serve return. He did that extremely well in the match, mostly taking the ball really early. He made it essential that Djokovic basically go really big on his second serve, or else Novak ends up winning just 40% of second serve points in the match. The last thing I want to highlight for Alcaraz is the concentration from start to finish. Unbelievable. This is what Carlitos said after the match, speaking with Chris McKendry, ESPN, that he was most proud of. He didn't talk about the level that he was able to play. He talked about the mental performance. And sometimes he doesn't go into all that much detail, Alcaraz, which is okay. But I'm quite certain that when he was saying how proud he was of how he handled it mentally, what he was referring to was the fact that he had no real dips other than, I think, the finish line nerves and the dumb fan who shouted during the swing volley. That and the finish line nerves created a little bit of a hiccup at 5-4 in the third set, which ended up forcing the third to a tiebreak. But that's one thing. That's finish line nerves. Concentration, it was there the whole time. And of course, how did he react after getting broken, serving for the match? He reset immediately. There was zero residue from that game, which is what I expected, but it's not something that should be taken for granted. So that was another one of the keys for Novak, was one of the things in the preview that I thought might work in Djokovic's favor, is that Alcaraz tends to be more up and down in his matches. Certainly throughout the tournament, he was more up and down than Djokovic in his matches. You could see that in terms of how many sets he's lost this tournament. You could make an argument that this was his easiest match since the second round, or since the first round. And that speaks volumes. And that has to do with Alcaraz locking in. And I know I talked about the serving, and I also kind of want to loop in the concentration topic into the serving, because I still continue to believe that Alcaraz stepping it up when he needs the serve to be really good and continuing to see that pattern suggests that sometimes the reason Alcaraz's serve can go away on him and become really inconsistent and sometimes lose the plot is a concentration issue and a mindset issue on the serve. The other thing that he said, which was insightful, is he felt that the serve was so poor the first week that it was the main thing that he was focusing on the practice courts throughout the week. So great job by Carlos, great job by his team of recognizing here's what we're not doing all that well, focusing in on it, and making those improvements for the end of the tournament. Let's go back to Novak and talk about the circumstance and what we can take away from this performance, and then I'll quickly loop back to Alcaraz quickly just for the end, closing thoughts. But let's talk about the circumstance here and what we can make of this. So obviously, context, Djokovic coming off of arthroscopic meniscus removal surgery. Even playing Wimbledon was in question. This is another loss, therefore, where you can call into question if Novak was able to play to his capabilities based on external factors, external circumstance. So I want to use this as a chance to have not just a discussion about Djokovic and the circumstances around this defeat in this particular Wimbledon final, but I want to use this to talk about tennis discourse and how to discuss these things, especially in regards to the idea of excuses. Because I've been analyzing tennis on this show and reading comments now for more than 5 years. And one thing that I see continually is discussion about when me or analysts or players are making excuses. I think it is really, really important to get this down. Let's lock this down, because we need to be able to categorize an excuse versus a reason. An excuse versus analysis of factors that contributed to a result. There has to be a difference between those two things, right? So I attempted to do this, and here's where I landed. An excuse is, first of all, anything untrue. If it's not true, then it's an excuse. It can also be something that is true, but could have been easily avoided by the player affected. So I'm going to use an example of one of my favorite excuses of recent years. When Tsitsipas lost to Alcaraz at Roland Garros last year and said, I was out of it because I wanted to nap and I took a melatonin in order to nap, and then I couldn't quite wake up for the match, right? That's an excuse because it's avoidable. Like, that's your fault. It's Tsitsipas's fault. So anything that in any way can be avoided, to me, is an excuse. What's a reason? A reason is anything that is, one, true, and two, an unavoidable circumstance that likely affected the outcome. Okay, so let's get that out of the way, and we need to be able to separate an excuse from a reason. I also want to bring Jannik Sinner in. Jannik Sinner and Novak Djokovic, vastly different at face value. Sinner having the best year of his career on an exceptional run at world number one. Djokovic having one of the worst years, if not the worst year, that he's had in a very long time. Vastly different, but also the same. Because with Sinner, on the physicality topic, I've seen 3 out of the last 4 majors. He's had physical issues in fifth sets. U.S. Open against Zverev, Roland Garros against Alcaraz, and here at Wimbledon against Medvedev. So let me start with Sinner, and let's kind of break this down. U.S. Open, it was a very, very physical match, tons of long rallies in stifling humidity, right? So I couldn't blame Sinner. I wasn't surprised, nor could I blame Sinner for struggling physically. In fact, even Zverev was struggling physically in that match. But that's the U.S. Open thing. Okay, Roland Garros, you have the preparation. You have the fact that there was the hip issue, and there was an illness that kept him in bed for multiple weeks without even being able to touch the racket, and he only had 11 days of full prep for the tournament, which could have affected his fitness. And then at Wimbledon, you have illness morning of the match. So preparation was good. Everything was fine. But then Jannik looked shaky physically during the match and then said after the match that the problems actually occurred even before stepping out onto the court. So that's Sinner's situation. Djokovic's situation. With all of the struggles, I'm not going to go tournament by tournament in specifics, but with all of the struggles that Djokovic has had throughout this year, relative to what we normally expect from him, there have been all kinds of reasons for it or explanations for it. Short offseason. Illness in Australia. Certainly this was well documented before the tournament started and in the first couple rounds of the tournament. Who knows where things were at ahead of the semifinal against Sinner, although there were reports out of Serbia that Djokovic did wake up with a fever that morning. Who knows? March, motivation. Rome, water bottle. Paris, knee. Wimbledon, coming back from the knee, right? Now, Paris, obviously, completely separate category in terms of there being a injury where you must withdraw unequivocally, right? But the question here with both Sinner and Djokovic, the reason I want to lump them together is because the question is rather similar. We have a pattern of results. We do have potential explanations for these results. So what do we make of it? How do we reach a conclusion? And to me, the answer in both cases are the same. The answer has to be somewhere in between ignoring the circumstances altogether and writing off all of these results because of the circumstance. If you're on either end of the extreme, if you are on the end of these are all just completely invalid garbage excuses that are made up out of thin air, it's wrong. These are real things. If you're on the side of we need to ignore all of these results, none of these results count because of this and that and that and that, that is also wrong. This is a results business. And over a large enough sample size, results have to be taken seriously. They have to matter. They cannot be written off. But they also need to be reasonably analyzed in context. Can we do that? Can we do both of those things at the same time? That's what I'm going to try to do. So do I take the Sinner physical issues seriously? I do. Do I take the idea that Djokovic hasn't had a tier 1 win all year? Do I take that seriously, that trend? I do take it seriously. These things are real. Do I think it's a crystal clear indication that Sinner doesn't have the ability to go 5 right now? Or do I think it's a crystal clear indication that Djokovic won't be a US Open contender later this year? No, I don't think they're crystal clear indications. But I do think that they are trends to be taken seriously. Regardless of all that, Alcaraz is the top dog heading into this summer. And I think that he has a real opportunity to build on this result. I'm excited to see what he does in the second half, especially because last year the second half was a little bit disappointing for him. Because frankly, the Wimbledon result, maybe along with the Cincinnati result, it seemed like his mind got in the way of his best tennis for a long time there. I think that's behind him. He is a really good learner when it comes to these things, and I think his abilities are going to continue to shine. These top-line abilities, Alcaraz at his best. As I said in my preview, I think that is the best. I think his very best is better, even right now, than Jannik Sinner, than Novak Djokovic, and he has a chance, I think, to be at his best more often if he really has his mental game fine-tuned like it appears he may. If he wins the US Open for a dominant 3-slam year, I mean, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I think that will signal a completion of the changing of the guard, because I know that that's going to come up as a question. Have we had a change of the guard? And what I always say is these things are gradual. It doesn't really happen at once. But if you want to say the change of the guard is over, that it's finished, that it's done, I think Alcaraz has a chance to do that in New York later this year, building on what we saw today. So congratulations to Alcaraz and his fans. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.